Hello and welcome to your weekly briefing for Global Conflict 1. In this video I'll be covering days 165 to 171 and doing my best to document the various political changes therein. So one of the biggest news stories, of course, this week is going to be the merge of House 9 and House 7. Now House 9 has been losing lots of territory to House 19, and in the last week they also lost a few factions to House 10 because those factions were no longer interested in sort of remaining on the sidelines in any potential conflicts with House 15, and this sort of soothed over some issues House 15 and 9 were having because those few factions were actually attacking House 15 players. So with the acquisition of a lot of House 7 factions, House 9, their faction general left and joined House 10 instead, and Pops59 has replaced him as the general of House 9. And one of the things that really confuses me and has confused me over the past 6 months or so in regards to the relationships between these houses that are allied against House 19, with the exception of House 15 of course now, is the fact that not all of them are really allied in a sister house fashion, or even in a fashion that they share common goals. So for example, we take House 11. Now, you recall in the past, House 11 has always maintained that they are good allies, or maybe even a sister house of House 10. However, House 11 seldom gets involved in the same conflicts as House 10 does, and until recently, they weren't even fighting House 19. So we saw that going on with House 11, and now we're sort of seeing it going on with House 9. So despite the fact that House 9 and House 10 and House 11 are all sort of allies in their own minds, that's pretty much where it stops. It's very platonic, and I think that you really can't call them sister houses at that point anymore, because to be a sister house, you really have to adopt the same diplomatic stances with your enemies and allies as the other houses in that very close-knit alliance. For example, we have House 15. Now, in their alliance is House 15, House 18, and House 4, and they all adopt the same stances regardless of what those wing sister houses want. So in regards to House 15, they set the diplomacy for the other two sister houses. That does not happen in the alliance of House 10, House 11, and House 9. House 9 doesn't fight House 15, but House 10 does, as does House 11. However, all three of them are united in a common goal because they are fighting House 19. So I don't really feel comfortable calling them sister houses at all, but I would call them an alliance. I did get some updated stats now after the merger. In that alliance that I just described, there are House 7, of course, not much left of them. House 9, which largely took over a lot of House 7 territory up there in Canada, and they have been really losing a lot of land. First they lost land in Australia, then they had players join House 11 and House 10. So now they're pretty much regulated to Canada, and that was territory that was acquired through the merger with House 7. Okay, House 10, of course, is part of that alliance, as is whatever's left of House 16 and 17. Apparently, they have dropped House 20, which is interesting, and I'm beginning to suspect House 20 has moved over to the House 19 side of the world alliances. So this is probably largely irrelevant to global politics, but I feel the need to keep people updated on this anyway, because Dave 1 is a well-recognized figure throughout the chronicles of Stronghold Kingdoms history, and he has continued his crusades even in Global Conflict 1, despite being vastly outcarded by players who were fresh off of the Wolf 1 world and had plenty of card points in tow. So recently he went and dropped from House 11. He took its faction and went neutral after House 19 declared war on House 11. Obviously, Dave 1 is partial to House 19 and did not wish to engage in that fight. However, after dropping House, he went on into vacation mode, and I have word anyway that his goals after returning to the game will be to hunt down the general of House 15 himself. So you have sort of a long-standing beef there that, if I recall correctly, extends back to one of the European worlds. So yeah, the House 7 alliance largely split up now. Additionally, Canada, that House alliance up there used to be House 2, remember? they have really fractured over time. So first you had it as House 2, then they broke up, became House 2 and House 7. Then several factions left House 7. One of them joined House 10, another joined House 15, and now a lot of the remaining ones joined House 9. So House 7 is largely no more. But in regards to what House 2 is up to these days, apparently they're still maintaining neutrality towards all other houses in the game. I really haven't heard a lot of action from them. If they decide to join the war, they're going to be taking the brunt of House 19's assault, most likely. I'm not sure that, but I mean, Europe is highly prized land because of how small the countries are. Those countries give a lot of glory points, so obviously that is desirable land, and if House 2 decides to declare war, they should be prepared to really move to another area pretty quickly because they're going to get overrun. But then again, maybe I'm being a bit unfair because the country of Spain has been controlled on and off by House 19 and House 10, and House 10 has been putting up quite a brilliant resistance there, so the close proximity of House 19 to the House 2 territories may not necessarily be indicative of an easy conquest. But after all the talks and negotiations, I guess, House 15 and House 10 are still no closer to achieving any sort of peace deal, and I really doubt that it will happen anyway. See, right now, House 15 has time on its side, so they can simply run down the clock. It is in their favor not to do anything because the situation becomes more favorable to them with each passing week. So if they can net any additional territory, I think they're in it for the long haul here. That is why I would consider them allied with House 19 in the same sense that I consider House 9 allied with House 10 and 11. They share a similar goal, although they do not adopt the exact same diplomatic stances against their neighbors, their neighboring houses. And the same could be said for House 1. They are really quite close towards the House 19, and I believe that if push came to shove, they would side with them in a heartbeat. So with the news out of the way, let's take a look at the various country changes. Now, of course, Canada has flipped from House 7 to House 9 as part of their merger. The US has flipped from House 10 back to House 15 because, of course, it did. Nobody actually expected that to stick, but it was interesting nonetheless that it actually occurred when I was recording last week, so I had to include it. Brazil has flipped from House 15 back to House 10. Argentina has flipped from House 10 to House 15, so there's a lot of flipping going on here each week. It seems to alternate by the week, you know. Greenland, of course, has flipped from House 7 to House 9. Ireland has flipped from House 7 to House 9. And this is rather interesting because the United Kingdom, when you're zoomed all the way out like this, it is called Ireland. I have no idea why. You'd think that when zoomed all the way out, it would say United Kingdom, but for some reason, it prioritizes Ireland instead, which is just inexplicable in my opinion. I have no idea what causes that. Spain has flipped from House 10 to House 19. Indonesia has flipped from House 9 to House 19. South Africa has flipped from House 9 to House 19. And Mauritania has flipped from House 10 to House 15. On a province and county level, we have Colombia flipping from House 10 to House 15. Wales in the United Kingdom flipped from House 19 to House 9. Southeast France flipped from House 7 to House 6. Bulgaria, as I noted a little bit earlier, flipped from House 13 to House 20. This might not be significant if House 20 has indeed joined the House 19 alliance now, because House 20 was a former part of the House 9 alliance, but House 9 has since abandoned that house as of this week. Yet another weekly flipper, Kashmir, has flipped from House 10 to House 4. West Libya in Northern Africa has flipped from House 11 to House 6. Western Algeria has flipped from House 10 to House 19. Tunisia has flipped from House 10 to House 15. Mali has flipped from House 11 to House 19. Burkina Faso, I'm guessing that's how it's pronounced, has flipped from House 11 to House 19. Benin has flipped from House 11 to House 19. West Congo has flipped from House 9 to House 19. Katanga has flipped from House 17 to House 5. And Zambia has flipped back from House 19 to House 10. So I believe that pretty much wraps it up for this week. As always, if you have any information you believe would be relevant to this report, feel free to get in contact with me in game. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you next week.
Stronghold Kingdoms. What will you fight for? Play now for free.